everyone and welcome to my very first video on my YouTube channel, Hayley Shoots Film, where you can follow me as I start my film photography journey. Okay, so in this video I'm going to be discussing my top 5 reasons for wanting to shoot film in 2020, and these are the reasons why I've now decided to hang up my Nikon DSLR for a film camera that was made nearly 40 years ago. It's 2020 and you might be wondering why I've decided to shoot in medium that's now considered to be a dying art. In this digital age, anyone can take really good photographs on their mobile phones. You also have DSLR cameras that make the life of a professional photographer so much easier. Equipment is generally much more lighter, you can store thousands of images on a tiny SD card, and images can be reviewed in an instant rather than having to wait for them to be developed. With all that being said, I have been in a photographic slump with digital photography ever since I graduated from university in 2015. And the main reason is because for my final degree show, I did a project documenting the old picture palaces of Liverpool using a Mamiya 7 medium format film. And I absolutely fell in love with film photography, and I just couldn't get over how sharp the images were compared to using my digital camera. I also dabbled in 35mm film photography using a Pentax K1000 around Liverpool and my hometown of Shropshire. Shooting film was a really fun experience for me, and I just loved how you didn't just take the photograph but you had to physically develop that image in order to see them. And I often found that the results were really interesting to look at, and I really loved the timeless charm about them. So that's enough of me waffling on. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction that's kind of led me up to this point. So without further ado, here are my top 5 reasons for wanting to shoot film photography. Okay, so number 1, nostalgic beauty. The aesthetics of film photography has to be number 1 on my list. I find the nostalgia of time past so beautiful, and I've always loved looking back at my nan and granddad's old photo albums. I feel like their images capture that beautiful, timeless charm that unfortunately we just don't seem to capture digitally today. However, by shooting film in the modern era, we can restore some of that nostalgic beauty. For example, these images that were shot in 2015 potentially look like they could have been shot in the 1950s, if not earlier. Despite this being an old medium, I cannot get over how sharp the images usually look. And I also like that even if you didn't quite get the right exposure, or the images turned out a bit blurry, or say you've even experienced some light leaks, these can still add to the beautiful art form that is lomography. Another thing that I generally love about film photography is you just do not know what your images are going to look like until you've had your film developed. And this heightens the magic and nostalgia for me. Because when it comes to reviewing your images for the first time, you are looking back at your memories, and half those shots you've probably forgotten you've taken. But you also have the added element of anticipation, because that whole time you have been hoping and praying your images turn out okay. And for me, I feel like you go on a much bigger journey with film photography than you do with digital photography, because you can review those images straight away with digital and there's no element of surprise. Number 2, enjoy the moment. There can be a drawback from being able to review your shot straight away. Now, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, which means I'm constantly critiquing and reviewing my shots as I go along. This means I end up with so many photographs trying to get the perfect shot in my head, and really stop me from appreciating what's actually in front of me at the time. And because an SD card can store hundreds if not thousands of images, sometimes you're not always considering whether the composition in front of you is always worth taking a photograph of. This means shifting through so many boring images before you find one shot that stands out from the crowd. Whereas with 35mm film, you are limited to 28 to 36 exposures on a roll, which will really teach you to be a much more thoughtful and intentional photographer. Every shot costs money with film photography, and this means you really slow down and make sure the composition and exposure is correct the first time round before taking the photograph. Once you take the photograph, there's really nothing more you can do than move on, enjoy the moment, and find your next interesting composition. Number 3, avoid the digital image backlog. As time goes on, I become increasingly frustrated at having to shift through hundreds of images, that you become much more of a digital editor than you do a photographer. My favourite part of photography is actually being out in the field and taking photographs. However, because I was continuously shutter spraying, having to go and edit all those images was really starting to ruin the fun of photography. Therefore, it would be really nice to learn a bit of discipline and control when it comes to my film photography. And with film, no 2 images are the same, which should make the whole process of editing my images so much more enjoyable. Number 4, becoming a better photographer. With a full manual film camera, you control everything from the exposure, shutter speed, and even the focus. For me, going back to basics and learning film photography is a step in me becoming a better photographer. I never really felt one with my digital camera, and I always felt like I was kind of second guessing the exposure and shutter speeds, to the point that I never really felt confident. Shooting film will force me to learn these techniques and become a much more confident photographer. And as every image does cost you money, it also forces you to gain a better eye for interesting compositions, all of which can be applied to my digital photography. With film, I feel like I can start at the beginning without feeling intimidated that I had a degree, but I still felt like I had a lot to learn. Number 5, price of digital lenses and cameras. Number 5 is debatable because although the price of purchasing rolls of films can add up, you can pick up a film camera and lens for around £30 to £50 on eBay. This is comparable to my Nikon D3000, which I purchased 10 years ago, which cost me roughly about £340. And I've never been in a position where I can upgrade from my entry-level DSLR camera or even purchase any further lenses. And I'm not saying you can't take fantastic shots with an entry-level camera, but at some point it's just nice to be able to upgrade. But where do you start? The latest technology in cameras is always changing, and they cost hundreds if not thousands of pounds. Full frame digital cameras are particularly expensive, and they are designed to capture the same 35mm frame that your film camera will have. Film cameras can definitely stand the test of time, especially if you pick up a fully manual camera. Now, these cameras are likely to work just as well today as they would have done when they were brand new. Overall, film photography may not work out cheaper in the long run simply because you have to purchase rolls of film. However, it's definitely much more cheaper to start off with, and you can casually pick up even more lenses along the way rather than having to save months on end like I would have to for digital equipment. So there you have it, guys, my top 5 reasons for wanting to shoot film in 2020. Film photography is definitely not dead, and more photographers are going back to it, which is great. However, the cost of film is rising, which is not so great. And you can't deny that digital photography definitely has its plus points, but for me, and maybe for many others, you cannot beat the grain in film photography. That grain breathes life into its images. That's about a wrap for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please join me in my next video where I introduce you to which film camera I decided to adopt. Please leave your comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on why you love film photography, or whether once you went digital you could never go back. Either way, I'd love to start a conversation with you. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe and turn those notifications on because I'll be posting a new video very shortly.